Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
It is I, the one, the only.
That's what we're going with.
I can't just not start now. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Supartu, joining me today is...
The Comics Kid 2099.
And a geek for a dame.
A geek for a dame. And today we are reviewing Sin City, the 2005 film adaptation of the comic by Frank Miller. This was directed by Robert Rodriguez and is... kind of notable in a number of ways, not least of which for being one of the first films shot entirely on blue screen. So, you know, some interesting background stuff on this too, besides just being, you know, your standard comic book film review kind of thing. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Ruben, you chose this. What made you want to talk about Sin City?
I had just recently seen it for the first time, and I'd never read the comic or comics, because I think it's like, if I'm not mistaken, Sin City is like a series of short stories. It's not like one ongoing thing. And I knew we all had kind of a love-hate relationship with Frank Miller, depending on the different projects he's done. And so I thought this would be kind of an interesting one to talk about.
Indeed, it is. So I'm going to go full disclosure. I was not able to rewatch the movie before this review, but I do think I remember it well enough, which is to the movie's credit. I remember watching this like around high school age and just really getting into it in kind of all the worst ways. And that's kind of the thing it's Frank Miller's work, I have complicated feelings and opinions on, and I think Sin City is probably the most go-to thing of everything wrong with his work, kind of like wrapped up into one bow, but also everything that's good about his work. Like it's the perfect sandwich marriage of those two things. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's your topic, Ruben, so I think you should lead us.
Well, like I said, I haven't read the comic, but I've seen like screenshots, or not screenshots, but like pictures from the comic, and artistically, I think it looks great. And I think I can say that about just about any Frank Miller comic. You like, have either of you read Holy Terror?
DK2?
Yeah. DK2, yeah, that one's... I don't know. Yeah, well, we'll table that one. Well, like Holy Terror, which came out around the same time as DK2, maybe a little bit later, but actually quite a bit later, I think. Like 10, 15 years. But I think Holy Terror looks really good visually, but the story is very problematic. And with Sin City, it's almost verging into parody at times, and I don't know how much of that is intentional and how much of that is like Frank Miller just really loves like the hard-boiled, you know, dirty cop with a heart of gold type thing, you know, and, you know, prostitutes with samurai swords and stuff like that. Like, I don't know how much of that is Frank Miller thinking this is really awesome, and how much of that is him thinking this is so stupid and silly and it's hilarious and I'm enjoying it and everyone else will too. Like, you know,
it's 100% the first one with Frank Miller.
Okay.
Alfie, please.
Like, legit, he is, like, he is such he's unapologetic in the things he, like, loves, and this is, like, a very big example of that. Is like, this is everything Frank Miller, like, in all his Daredevil work, in his Batman run. And this is just like, and then just things he done after that, this is all an encapsulation of it, like Ian said, but very much he's not a creator who's embarrassed of what he does. He's very much extremely eager to lean into the tropes he likes, the ideas he likes, the sexualization of like if it's not a Frank Miller story unless there's at least one prostitute in it. Like it's
oh man, I can't wait for Superman Year One Book 2. It's gonna be great.
I'm legit. Once he gets to Metropolis, there's going to be a prostitute. I'm telling you. It's just, he can't help himself. All you have to do is look at her name, Miho, in this. And immediately you see, oh, this is just his live-action Elektra for how he characterized her in the Daredevil run. It's just exactly the same sort of template he goes to. And I feel like that can be a strength sometimes because there are some aspects of this, like, the dude fucking knows how to write some of these kind of stories. Like, he is in his element, and he did get big for a reason, on Daredevil and a niche character, by bringing this hard-boiled take to it. But at the same time, I don't think he's self-aware enough of his own faults, even though if you spoke to him, he might be. But I genuinely think he doesn't get it for what he's doing wrong, like most problematic people. And he's perpetuating this idea he keeps bringing back to of like sin and morally grey ideas that I think, yeah, he's like very much, I guess, similar to Grant Morrison, that he is not afraid to do what he likes, damn other people, and that can lead to good results and that lead to bad results. And I think Sin City is exactly that. That's why he's probably involved so much into the process. Is unlike Alan Moore, where he's like, no one can adapt my work. Frank Miller has an idea of, if you're going to adapt it, I want to be in. I want to make it as close to the page as possible. And fuck me, this film is like 100% that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really interesting. I remember watching a documentary about like filming things on celluloid versus digital capturing of film. And they had an interview with Robert Rodriguez, and he's like, he talks about how he was watching the editing of The Phantom Menace, of all things. He was watching the making of, and he went to his bookshelf and he pulled off Sin City, and he said, now I know how to do this. And like that was kind of the inspiration for him, is to be able to adapt Sin City on film and get the digital side of things going. So there's that layer to this film that's really interesting, but there is a very, very much so an intent with this film to be as close to the work as possible. And I to be fair, I haven't read Sin City either. I know of it, and from what I've heard, this is more or less a one-to-one adaptation. I've not heard of many changes that were made between the book and the movie. Or some of the stories in the movie, let me put it that way.
Go ahead.
It doesn't cover everything in the books from what I'm aware of, but what it does choose to cover is like beat for beat. And there's like almost in some of the scenes like panel for panel, in much the same way like Zack Snyder tried to do with Watchmen. I've seen videos where it's just like panel comparisons of certain things of this movie compared to the book, and it is kind of incredible. Like even the lighting and the shadows is the same. This looks like Frank Miller art with real people, which is crazy.
Yeah. I think from what I understand, like, Sin City is a series of short stories, so they basically took 3 short stories, I guess, and just kind of put them in the movie, and then you've got like a running thread going between these 3. But it's like from what I've heard also, I agree with you, Ian, I've heard that this is pretty much spot on an adaptation.
Which is, there's that complicated relationship with the thing where there's a lot here, I feel, that you kind of just have to admit is good purely on the execution, purely on the practicality of doing the thing. You've got to admire that part of it. But then there's like some stuff in here that's kind of like underlying it all, and I'm like, I remember, full disclosure, I don't think I was a very good person in high school. I was a pretty shitty teenage boy. I remember watching this movie with some friends in high school, and there's the scene where what's his name, Michael Clark Duncan, slaps the shit out of Rosario Dawson's prostitute character. Like, she's tied down in a chair, and he backhands her, and like the chair comes off the ground, and she falls to the floor. And I remember me and my friends going, "Whoa, shit!" And I think that's the exact thing Frank Miller wanted with that scene. I think that's the exact thing he was trying to play into, of like, yeah, later he gets his head cut off and all the guys get punished and whatnot, so I guess we learn our lesson of toxic masculinity, and yeah, he's the bad guy, but at the same time, there's something very much there where I feel that's the intended reaction that is wanted, of like a kind of, oh, that is so cool. And so it's kind of hard not to see that underlying there, and the framing of not just bad things, but like problematic ass shit as kind of cool. Like, yeah, it's the bad guy who's trying to bust down a door and get into this girl's house and yada yada. But at the same time, it's framed in such a way where yeah, he's the bad guy, but also she was kind of wrong for getting involved with him, you know? Like, which isn't unrealistic to have that kind of sense of things, but at the same time, it's what's the point you're trying to make? Is the question that starts to bubble up in my head, you know? I feel like there's maybe the surface point, but the communication of it, the language being used to communicate it is, if not directly contradictory, a little undermining to the overall message.
Yeah, it's like you can boil this down to like nearly every single character in this film to just, the girls are bad girls, but they're bad, as in how Frank Miller describes it, and they do things they shouldn't, and they can be feisty, but at the same time they're not strong enough or evil enough or morally corrupt enough to cross that line to save themselves. But then the good guys, the men we follow, are monsters, and they're tough as nails, and they don't take no shit, but they're also all like real hard-ass sons of bitches. And the only thing that separates them from the bad is the bad guys are the worst possible monsters. And it's those three kind of tropes where everyone is bad in Sin City, but that makes, Frank Miller likes to do it that when in a world where everyone's bad, those bits of good in people shine more. So that, like, again, you get like the thing with Marv and like Goldie is like, she's the only bit of color in that. Like, she shines even though we'd have no idea what she was really like as a person. And she kind of manipulated this guy in order to protect him, but that act of kindness to him is then seen as like a blessing from God. And Miller likes to do that a lot in his other works. He's very much the ultimate. He's not a. It's hard because he is a cynical person, but there's a reason why he says he likes Superman more than Batman. Is he has a very weird sense of hope, in that the world's fucked, but we might as well enjoy it. Kind of idea of like how his positivity comes through, and I feel like this film goes for that a lot. Is you get like the fucking intro of this film is the woman who pays in a hitman to kill her because she wants a quick death. And it's just left at that. I was like, that's how you start this. Is this, oh, but he's a hitman and she just committed suicide with that. But it's framed as this almost relief, beautiful kind of like, he goes for very big ideas, but that also comes with like the Frank Miller like underpinning. That's why I think legit the most perfect piece of casting for anything ever was Frank Miller as like the priest. He's just like, this is a house of God. Like, that is Frank Miller. I want that as his like quote. Like, that is entirely everything about him, and then he gets shot in the face. Like, he would have, I think he'll remember that forever, because that is legit everything he wants to do with his work. And I kind of like that, especially in the context of this film. I think some of that does work.
Yeah, that's the thing for me, is like, it's not that anything Frank Miller has to say is just completely and totally wrong 100% of the time. I think he's always got an argument, and despite him kind of tripping into morally gray and problematic areas, I think his heart's in the right place. His head's just kind of up his ass. Is kind of my take with Frank Miller. And it's unfortunate because, you know, he's a really important writer in comics, for better or worse. And so it's kind of weird to have this figure that I mean, almost all of modern comics is a reaction to Frank Miller, whether that's an embrace or a rejection. And of course, you know, that's maybe giving him a little too much credit. Certainly Moore and Gaiman and Morrison all helped in that too, but Frank Miller kind of seems like the breakout one there, and he seems like the one that that's kind of owned the role more than anyone else. Like, Gaiman went on and he did other things, and Morrison just, like, never quite left, and he's always trying to change it from the inside, and Moore just bitches constantly, but Miller kind of just made his mark, and he comes back every so often, but not for very long. And so I think he kind of leans into that pinnacle figure the most. And then when you have this film come out, he kind of, you know, gets brought into the limelight all over again, and this film triggered a number of Frank Miller projects. There's 300 by Zack Snyder. There was The Spirit. Ugh. And you know, fuck, if Batman vs Superman isn't almost wannabe Dark Knight Returns at times, you know?
Oh, it definitely is, yeah. That movie was announced with the guy who played the military guy from Man of Steel. He's reading clips from Dark Knight Returns, so that's totally, like, we wouldn't have Batman vs Superman the movie without Frank Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like that is you touched on something very important there. I think even going into this film, I think it directly relates just to the state of comics. Is if you want like a direct comparison to like the budding superhero movie universe we've seen, is let's say Morrison, Gaiman are like Blade, and then Moore's like the X-Men films, and they introduce people to the public that maybe these things are movies and stuff like, but they're also kind of their own thing, and they're kind of not really superheroes, like unless you blink at them a little bit. And then Dark Knight Returns is like the first Spider-Man movie, where this is the character on the screen, and then it changed everything. Is then anything follows that mold or a different mold against that? And Miller really, again, even with something like Born Again, he's very much an influencer, and he hasn't really got many influences in comics, at least, aside from like he's got some views with like Steve Ditko and stuff. And then when you get him to do stuff like this, which is a comic book adaptation, but it's very much a comic book adaptation to film, but as close to the comic book as you could get. He's going at an approach, and I'm interested to see where you guys land on this, because we did do an episode on adaptation, but Miller spoke it was in a Daredevil documentary, and it had it's a really good, because it's got all the creators on Daredevil, and he'll talk. And in Miller's section, he talks about why he thinks comic books are better than film, because in comic books you can control pacing, you can focus on, you can have them stay on an image, and then they move, like the reader controls the pacing, sorry. You can go through a comic book however fast as that person can, or you could just reread it, or you could turn a page and go back to everything really simply, and it can be part of the experience, and you can form about that. Whereas with a movie, you have to like pause, rewind and stuff. It's not meant to be part of the experience. This film very much feels like him trying to justify that as much as possible to cinema. And I guess, how do you guys feel about this kind of comic book structuring to the film?
I really do like it, because, you know, in your first watch through, you don't necessarily notice stuff, but then as you go through it more, it does have those very yeah, really, there's nothing else quite like it. It's just, when Superman's in the background of a panel randomly, or when you see like the LexCorp or Wayne Tech logo show up somewhere. You just have these little nods and moments, and those are in here. And they don't call all that much attention to them, except for one time where it's like the weirdest break during what's his name? Big guy, Marv? Mickey Rourke's character? Yeah.
Yeah.
When Marv enters the bar, we suddenly go into Clive Owen's head, and Clive Owen gives narration about what he thinks of Marv, and then later we do Clive Owen's story. And, like, that's the only time it really breaks, but, like, they're just kind of all circling around each other a little bit. Like, the bar Marv's at is the one Jessica Alba's stripping at later, and all this other stuff. Like, there are all these little moments where they just keep passing each other left and right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hadn't really noticed that about the Clive Owen thing. I'll need to, if I ever watch this again, I'll need to keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I think I need to look for that documentary, because I think there are. I really love superhero comics, and I love, there are some comics I like that are not superhero comics, but I'm not going to go so far as to say that I think like one medium is the best medium for storytelling, because I think that movies have got their pros and cons, television shows have got their pros and cons. Like, even, you don't see it hardly anymore, but, well, you do now, but like, you used to have like radio dramas like back in the 30s, and now you don't have that anymore on the radio. Now you have like podcasts, like, I think there's like one podcast that does it like a narrative, but that's even got its pros and cons. So like, adapting something, like Sin City, even pretty faithfully, and I don't know because I haven't read the comics, but from what I've seen, it looks like they did it pretty faithfully. Even then, though, like, I like to think that Robert Rodriguez, because he's a self-confessed Frank Miller fan, and so I'm curious if Rodriguez allowed himself to use the medium of film to say, okay, here's some things I can do differently from the comic and maybe improve. Because, like, if you're just going to try and do exactly what the comic did, you're going to limit yourself, because you're not a comic book. You're a movie. And, the comic book, in the same way, like, don't try and make a movie in comic book form. Use the strengths of the comic book medium to do things that you would not be able to do in a movie. And so I'm curious just how, because like The Watchmen, that's another example you brought up. Like, that's one that at times I feel like is hamstrung because it's trying so hard to faithfully adapt the story of the source material, and then at times I feel like it's going off in its own direction, maybe not maybe not in a good way. And so I'm curious, have either of you, Ian, you said you haven't read the comic. Alfie, have you read the Sin City comics?
No, I haven't read the Sin City comics.
Okay. I'm just curious now, and I'm probably not going to go and read the comics, but I'm curious if this kind of does its own thing, like staying true to the spirit of the source material, but allowing itself to be a movie as opposed to a comic book that's in motion.
I don't know, but it is, I think, the first of its kind where it is trying to just be as close to the books as possible, even if it's, out of necessity doing some stuff to make it work better in film or who knows what. Because, like, there are a lot of long shots where characters are narrating and nothing's really happening, and so that works fine in a comic where, you just can do a panel with a bunch of narration and one really intense look. But that works less fine in a movie if you just have a single static shot of a person with absolutely nothing going on in the background or the foreground or anything. And so, like, maybe, there's more subtle things that were done just to make it more watchable as a film. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a moment where Clive Owen's character is narrating while he's driving a car, and the camera, like, in the comic, it's probably just a still image of him from side profile. But if I'm remembering correctly, in the movie, the shot zooms in on him as the narration is going on, which obviously is something just to make it more watchable as a film. But this is really, I think, the first of its kind where it was trying to just be really, really close to the books. Not just in presentation or tone or anything, but like character, everything else is really just making a genuine effort to be right off the page. Because like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, you could maybe make an argument for, but most Spider-Man fans will tell you kind of tonally it has the soap opera-y feels of Silver Age comics, but character-wise, Peter's quite different. And I'm trying to think of, this is 2005, I'm trying to think of what else came out that was even attempting to be this direct to the source material.
I'm kind of drawing a blank, and don't you think that's a really big shame? Like, legit, the biggest takeaway I have from this movie, and I wish it happened, is I really think this should have ushered in the era of, okay, we can do these comic book films, not even that we can just actually do the looks of the characters as close as possible and just change how we shoot the scene or what colors we use in the scene. We don't have to adhere to realistic color palettes or just generally lighting and shadow. We can adjust that to make it look better. It's the fact that we didn't get, we don't even have to adapt a storyline and like tweak it to make it fit a runtime. We can just do an anthology. We could do issues. You could adapt an issue of a comic in a film, and like you could adapt like a run of like a 12-ish like issue mini or something, like, and you could just end every section like that. And it pisses me off kind of that they didn't do this, because that would be amazing. Like, obviously not everything would work, but I can name quite a few off the top of my head, and I'm sure each of you could as well, of just things I'd love to see get this treatment.
Yeah. And like, even if it wasn't in film directly, I mean, I've been really wanting DC to just go and do a whole movie of animated shorts, like all original shorts, just adapting famous comics, single issues. It'd be beautiful.
I've always kind of, I've been a little more, like, a lot of people will get upset that, they took this character and they changed this one tiny aspect when transferring it into film. A lot of people kind of get outraged at that, and I usually I'm a little more forgiving of that because, like I said, it's a different medium, but also I've always said, if you get mad because they changed this one thing, from the Sin City comic to the Sin City movie, my answer is go read the comic if you want the comic. But also, I see where you're coming from, Alfie, because we've got especially now, we get, 5 superhero movies a year. There's no reason why one superhero movie every 10 years couldn't be something like this. Like, what if they did, I don't know, I can't think of a good example, but, like you were saying, an anthology. Do like a movie that's like, what if you let 10 different directors have their shot at Spider-Man in one movie, and it's like each of them get 10 minutes and they just do a 10-minute Spider-Man movie. You could do a different actor, you could be animated or whatever. Like, each one is just the director's take on Spider-Man. Like, I think at this point, the superhero genre, and I hate to call it a genre, but the superhero faction of movies is so huge, you could do something like that. You could make a little bit of a risk and see where it goes.
I totally agree. It is disappointing because, like, it seems like this came out and Hollywood kind of took a little bit of the wrong message. It's like, so people really like when we adapt Frank Miller's stuff. And I'm like, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's important. It's good. 300 is fine. I like 300. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure almost, but I dig it well enough. But then as you go on, you kind of get to like Watchmen, and that's a divisive movie to say the least. And then you start to get stuff that's like like it's weird. We had like early 2000s superhero movies where we kind of sort of adapt a storyline but tweak it to fit this film. And then we kind of got away from that for a little while and started just doing fully original stories that have like vague inspiration from a storyline. And then we've kind of swung back the other way, and now we're doing it's more or less adapting the thing, but it's pulling it's going for like a deeper pull now, you know? Like things just feel like they're pulling for a bit deeper, a bit of a less well-known story kind of thing. And so it's just it's weird that they didn't try to continue with more direct adaptation of stuff and just let it be what it is. And like even, you know, I was mentioning the animated movies. Even DC for their direct-to-video animated movies kind of went through this, you know, and guess what was in there? 2 Frank Miller films, and it's weird, right? Like DC, it started out with Superman Doomsday, which is kind of like a tweaked adaptation, and then it goes to New Frontier, which is almost direct. Direct adaptation, and then you get like stuff like Under the Red Hood, which is adaptation where it's fixing the problems. It's just, I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah, there's like a... Go ahead, man.
No, I was gonna agree with Ian. I didn't really have an original thought there.
Ruben interrupted me again without his original thoughts. Makes me mad, real mad. But yes, the whole... This cycle people get to... It really does feel like they're jumping on trends. Like, it never feels like... Which this does feel like this, but most DC things... Because Marvel animated scene is laughably pathetic. And then the movie scene is completely doing their own thing with, like, vague inspirations. The DC scene in particular feels like they're jumping on trends of, okay, we're going to test the waters with Doomsday, and then we're going to... I start adapting things, and then Jason Todd's popular, but the Under the Hood actual comic book isn't the best thing to recommend. Let's make an animated movie on it and like hype on this train, and all this thing really does feel like it's from a business standpoint, and that's fine. It is a business now to do that, but I do think for something like this, it does kind of need to be from the creatives themselves, who will have the reverence for the source material to do it right. Because if you are going to go 100%, okay, we're literally going to change everything we know about how films are shot and what's on the screen and like lighting, composition. To make that risk as the director, you have to be able to be confident enough. Is like, no, this works. I love this material so much. I get why this works this way, and therefore you can also, once you have to understand, you can tweak it. I feel like that's maybe where this succeeds, that something like Watchmen maybe fails a little bit more, is because I don't think Zack Snyder gets Watchmen. And I feel that's where a lot of the failings of that movie's adaptations, particularly in the action scenes, where they're just uber violent for this, like, in sake of like, oh, this is really badass, but like, that's the biggest thing from more you could ever get to. Whereas Miller, on the other hand, with this, is very much like, if this was a tame... If it's cut out as much of the violence as possible and like remove the hookers, then it wouldn't be a Miller project. But because it has that reference for this material, you get all that. And I feel like my dream scenario is like, man, I wish DC would just nut up and make like a 3-hour all-star Superman movie. I think you'd have to get Grant Morrison on board for it in the same way that Frank Miller was in this, just to ensure it was done right. Because fuck me if DC doesn't understand All-Star Superman. They spent the last 10 years making that evidently clear. They didn't get what they had with that. So I feel like these are ambitious and probably would yield a lot of like seminal, timeless results if it was done really well for like the absolute best comic book storylines. But at the same time, I feel they're a lot harder to do, and probably why a lot of people don't do it is because they have that intimidating factor. And a lot of directors just simply aren't comic book fans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of like irks me more and more as like I get further away from certain films. Like, I love The Dark Knight still, but like you hear Chris Nolan and he's like, yeah, I read a lot of comics to really get into this film. I read The Dark Knight Returns. I read Batman Year One. I read Long Halloween, I read The Killing Joke. I'm like, okay, and did you read No Man's Land? Did you do any deep pulls that took you maybe more than an hour and a half to read? Like it's still a great film. Those are still great comics, but like that's the skimming the surface, right? Like there's so much more to Batman and the world than those comics. That's what everyone starts on. Give me, I don't know Matt Reeves, but like I want Matt Reeves to be, the guy that's doing the Batman film, because he's been reading weekly Batman for 20 years or whatever, even if I don't agree with his ultimate take, I'd be more interested in a take like that that's going for more deeper pulls, that has a more core understanding of the character than that,
I don't know, because like I was saying, like, I didn't really read Batman. Before Batman Begins came out, I had read, like what you said, pretty much, The Dark Knight Returns, Year One, Long Halloween. That was pretty much it that I had read. And then maybe Arkham Asylum. Batman Begins really got me into Batman comics. It, and then The Dark Knight kind of was a 1-2 punch, but and it's, for me, what I think is great about Batman Begins is it's not a faithful, air quotes, a faithful adaptation. People say, oh, it's based on Year One. No, not really. Year One would make like a 25-minute movie if you made it a faithful adaptation. So like it's air quotes Year One in the sense that Bruce Wayne is returning to Gotham, but like it's so much, it's different, and I think it's faithful to the character of Batman to a point, but even Nolan's Batman is pretty different from the Batman of the page, because this is a Batman who wants to settle down, and until, I know Tom King, from what little I know, he's kind of been playing around with that a little bit with him marrying Catwoman, but like, this is for most of what I've read of Batman, he doesn't ever intend on settling down. So like, Nolan's Batman is a very different Batman, and I'm okay with that, because I really enjoyed 2 of those movies, and I liked one okay, but it got me into comics, and so now if I want to read the comic book Batman, I'll just read the comic book Batman, and then like if I want a slightly different take on it, I'll go to Nolan's Batman,
Mm-hmm. No, I get that, and I'm much the same way, but I'm just saying at the same time, like that's just kind of my example, because whatever. At the same time, I'd be interested to see the movie that would be made from someone who's been into him for a while, because I mean, we've got a wealth of experience of what happens when you've got people that have been into the thing for a while, and sometimes it certainly varies in quality, but I mean, the DCAU, Paul Dini's been a comics fan his whole life, and he is deeply involved in that. Same with Bruce Timm, and it definitely has its dips in quality, not gonna lie, but it's showing you a wealth of experience and understanding of the character that allows you some really cool stuff. All that being said, I think we should circle back and talk about the movie itself a little bit more, as opposed to just the wider implications around it. If that's cool, unless anyone has anything else they really wanted to get out right now.
No, I think that's fine. We can talk about stuff like this all day. Just for this film then, because we do kind of have separate storylines, I think maybe a good idea would be to go through each of them, and then we'll give favorites once we've discussed them a little bit. Is first off, what did you guys, because this is a story from the comics, what did you guys think of that, the intro with the hitman and the girl in the red dress at the rooftop? How do you think that works as like a very short story?
It's one of those things where it took me so long to understand what was going on in that scene. It's kind of hilarious.
Same.
It took me maybe 2 or 3 viewings before I understood. Oh, he's the hitman, and oh, he's back at the end of the movie to kill the rat. Oh, I felt really lost on that side of things.
I understood that. I understood that it was the same guy, but it wasn't until you mentioned that she had hired him herself at the beginning, that I did not pick up on. I thought I just assumed that once I had seen the whole movie, and it's like, okay, he's the guy who killed her at the beginning, and then he kills her at the chick from that one show, not One Tree Hill, Gilmore Girls. He kills her at the end. Like, okay, like he's a guy that you call to kill like bad people or whatever. And so I assumed that he was hired by someone else at the beginning. So I didn't pick up on that at the beginning, that he was hired by her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I got that he was hired by her when I went through it because of that line where he's like, I'll cash her check in tomorrow. I wish I knew what she was running away from. It's like, oh, okay. He doesn't know. He probably just got kill me now, like at this time on this day or something. And he was like, okay, it's a job, but I have no idea. I'll try and make it for as like pleasant and as peaceful for you as possible, but I have no idea why you're doing this, and kind of sad about it. Which I think is a good story, just in terms of if you were a hitman, you probably would get calls like that of like people trying to escape abusers and stuff. Like, shit, that could be like you'd be like, oh, I it's a dirty job, but it's weird when someone wants me to kill them. It's a very different kind of emotional turmoil for like someone in that position.
Which is funny because I read a lot of like this movie Awakened. Yeah, sure. Awoke. There we go. Kind of a noir murder mystery thing in me that I really got into for a while, and I read like 4 or 5 novels where like a hitman was the main character, and literally all of them had a chapter that was just that story. Like, it's the most tropey shit to do with a hitman is, oh, someone hired you to kill them. Like it's so ridiculous how overused it is, but it feels so fresh and clever. Oh.
Yeah, it's just again Miller showing his influences outside of comics and just the shit he enjoys, and again is never going to shy away from or even subvert that much. He just likes executing it well, and I think he's good at that. He's got an idea that maybe been done before, but he's very good at doing it in a Miller execution type way, and that's what I liked about this. And it was only until I was doing some research before we did this, and there was an interview with Frank Miller where he talks about this intro, and he said that she specifically was dating someone who had threatened to kill her slowly and painfully, and so she was like, I can't escape this guy, I'm just going to kill myself as quickly as possible, like as nicely. And like I would kind of, hearing that and then rewatching the film for this, I was kind of surprised that like he wasn't a character in this that she was dating or something, but maybe they were implied if you went like deep pulls. Yeah, I like that this is a tone setter, because it lets you know that you didn't really have to have any callbacks back to this, but you're just like, oh, this is the kind of story we're going to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm. With these kind of like dark endings and stuff, and yeah, that's definitely just a trend throughout these. There's like some good that happens in each story, but just, man, the road there is like bathed in blood. And it's kind of crazy to see it. So like, yeah, it's like, okay, well, I guess at least she's not gonna suffer, but still, she's dead. Which, I guess if you're gonna go to all the trouble to hire a hitman, why not kill the person who's gonna be causing you so much trouble?
Yeah, I guess maybe it's just like either they're too powerful, because somehow in these stories, Miller likes to go with that they're untouchable, the untouchable character, even if it's ridiculous of how untouchable they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
The priest and his brother, the politician guy.
And the little yellow bastard. They're all just completely untouchable, and it's crazy. So then we go into story number 2, which is the first part of the Bruce Willis story, where he saves little Nancy. And that is interesting. It's weird. Does anyone else think Bruce Willis just sold himself as old way too soon? Like there's this where it's
How
like
old was he when this came out?
like maybe 50 or something, you know, like there was this, and then just a couple years later there was Red, where he's like hanging out with oh, what's her name?
John Malkovich, Helen Mirren.
Helen Mirren, yeah, and they're all like, we're the retired old spy people, and I'm like, Bruce Willis, you're like 55, man. You don't need to be doing this to yourself. Tom Cruise is in his like late 40s, and he's still having everybody act like he's 23 in movies. You can get away with not being the old man for a few more years. You don't have to lean into it so hard, but he just does. It's like, old man, you know, take your heart medicine, power through it, old man. You can barely lift that cannon, old man. It's just all over the place, and I'm like, this is a little odd with Bruce Willis. I don't think he would have been my go-to pick for casting. Just saying.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Alfie.
He definitely has the. I think a lot of the male characters with this were picked specifically for, like, Bruce Willis and Mickey Rourke are Frank Miller characters brought to life. Like, they've got the Frank Miller face. They got, like, Bruce Willis legit. I could buy him as like how Frank Miller draws Dark Knight Returns Bruce, where they say he's old, but he looks like ridiculously good for his age, and like they keep calling him old man, but he's got that jawline, and he's got like that like really squinty eyes with like the crow's feet, but it's like they look like if you tried to touch him, it'd be like hitting steel. Is that that's the Frank Miller drawing of any character, and those two actors really pull that off the most. So I think that's probably why they went with it. Like, oh, big name who looks like a Frank Miller character. Yes.
I think that's fair.
I think you're right, Ian. He's not. I mean, he's not old, but he can pull off that attitude very well. After watching this, and you say you're right. He's not like, you know, oh, it was just 2 days until retirement, and then I had to go and save this little child. And, you know, he's not that old, but I cannot imagine anyone else playing that role having seen him do it now. Like, somehow he's reached into the future, and he has pulled the essence of old retired Bruce Willis and brought it back with him into the past to channel it into this role, because he is, like, spot on here, I think.
Okay, so to be fair, Bruce Willis is 64. All right?
Right now?
Yeah, he was born in 55. So when this movie came out, he was 50. That's just, it's a little silly. Just saying, I don't know, it's, like, I think he plays the role well, but I always found that relatively distracting. Because I'm like, Bruce Willis isn't old. What? Oh, man. Yeah. I think you're right, though, Alfie. He does just have that kind of grizzled look to him. You know, he's a big name actor, but he does have like a more rough and tumble kind of look. I guess I can see that the casting for that reason. Then that's a good point. But then we have like the Frank Miller side of things, which is, oh yeah, you got a guy who fucks children, but he needs them to scream, so he tortures them first. And I'm like, man, it wasn't enough that he just kidnapped the girl? You really gotta dial it up to 11 like that?
You know, Ian, you and I were, before we were recording, we were talking about Superman Year One, which I have not read, but Ian was telling me that, Alfie, have you read it?
Yeah.
Okay, so spoilers for Superman Year One, Issue 1. Lana Lang is almost raped in it, and we were talking about how, like, in a story like this, you know, rape is a pretty heavy subject matter, and you want to be careful when you're dealing with it. And I think a lot of times when I see it used in stories like this, it's not handled carefully. It's just there to expediently move the plot in a certain direction, or it's there, like what you and I were talking about, Ian, it's there to be edgy and taboo. And I think here we are. It's a Frank Miller story with rape in it, and I think that's what it is. Again, like, Frank Miller is a huge fan of the hard-boiled genre of, like, you know, the city with 1,000 stories, and this is one of them. And, like, you know, the really dirty, grimy, like, just awful, you can't look away, but also you don't want to watch kind of thing. He's a huge fan of that, and I don't know what that says about him as a person, and I'm not trying to say that he is a really horrible person, but you got to be pretty messed up if you enjoy this kind of thing, if you enjoy putting this onto the page and putting it out there for others to see.
See, I don't know if I'd go that far. I think it just lacks tact. Is what it comes down to. I think it's always dangerous to try to assume too much about the artist just through their art, because I mean, at least he's framing it as a bad thing that a weak person does. Like, that's the thing. The little yellow bastard is a evil person, but he's also pathetically evil, Like, he's not like Bond villain evil where he's kind of cool for it. It's like his evilness is framed as pathetic, and he's like less than because of his evilness. So you gotta give him a little bit of credit there. But at the same time, the action taken does normalize it, or does make it seem less severe than it is. And I think that's the part that he misses, or the part that he doesn't quite connect to. Or maybe, if I'm wanting to be less generous, maybe it's the part that he chooses to ignore. That's kind of the area I'm in. I'm like, I understand ultra violence. I get it. If you don't get ultra violence, go read A Clockwork Orange. I think that book pretty effectively communicates what the appeal is and what the solution to it is. But I hesitate to say, oh, if you like to write scenes where characters get brutally tortured, then you're a terrible person. I'm like, no, there's more to it than that. There is some level at which it's kind of like an escape, and you can make the argument that, you're still indulging in it, and so it's like, it's perpetuating it. I'm like, you're not wrong, but at the same time, there is still something underlying that I do feel is at least worth exploring, but it could definitely use more tact, and this I would say doesn't have that tact.
I think a good example of kind of where you're coming from, and maybe someone who I think leans more into the tact than Miller does, but explores very similar kind of themes, is Garth Ennis. Again, his run on Punisher Max is just 100%. Every horrible thing you could ever imagine happening to people, every single moment, it seems. That he had a quote on why he writes stories like that, is he feels like, as although it is probably exaggerated for comic book standards to make it a story, atrocities do happen in the world. Atrocities do exist in the world. Atrocities probably happening right now as we speak. There's things you can't run away from, and although you can tackle these subjects specifically with the idea of healing people, with the idea of, okay, we're going to talk about this subject matter and we're going to do it as most respectfully as possible, and you're kind of walking on eggshells when you're doing that, because every single person reading that will have a different experience, especially if the person writing it hasn't gone through the experience they're trying to write. But the way Garth Ennis says, there is something to it, to just seeing bastards get brutally killed in the most surreal sense possible, as that's the escapism. And I think Miller leans heavily into that kind of idea, is you have to see this and you get angry at you angry at the villain for doing it in the first place, and then when the hero destroys them in the most horrible way possible,
eventually I'm just punching chunks of wet bone into the dirt.
It justifies that violence, because say that guy had just been a mugger, suddenly you're not rooting for Bruce Willis anymore, because holy fuck. But because that person is so ridiculously evil, like pure scum of the earth, you're like, oh yeah, no, he deserved it. As crazy as that sounds to see a human being's head smashed into bone, I think most people would be like, on like the most primal level, oh yeah, I'm fine with that. Like, it's not... I think that's to justify it. And I think there is a sense of dark... Well, not even that, because it isn't like you're getting like a wrong enjoyment from the work. It's just exploring themes and ideas which are a little bloodier, a little more crass, and just the wretches of humanity. But those things do exist, and those things should be in media, and there's an argument to be made as how much do you stray away from that for storytelling, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the thing for me, is like, as problematically as he handles it, as he definitely doesn't handle it with, I feel, the right amount of tact. He at least ends up where I feel the right place to end up is. I'll give him that. And, you know, the story along the way is just on the form side of things, just on the pure work on the page, as it were, or screen in this case, is really at just a expert level, I feel. Like, that's the thing, is even if you don't disagree with the premise or the notion behind it, the execution is so damn good that you can't help but kind of admire it just for that alone. And, like, you know, I haven't read Sin City. I haven't rewatched this movie in years. But how much of the damn narration do I remember? You know? Marv's not a bad guy. He was just born in the wrong time. He would have been happy swinging an axe into some guy's face on a battlefield 10,000 years ago. Back then, they would have thrown girls like Nancy at him. And, like, that's so damn good. Frank Miller and narration, like, he is the best. I as much as I have a problem with Frank Miller on some levels, his narration is damn near unstoppable, you know? It's ridiculous how well he is able to narrate things, and just the word choice is so damn perfect all the time. Just things make it sound great. You know, you can barely hold up that cannon, referring to the revolver Bruce Willis's character is carrying. What are some other really great lines in this? They're a dime a dozen, you know?
Would killing me give you pleasure? The killing? Nah. All the things leading up to the killing? That's gonna have a gas. like that kind of shit is just... Again, it's in every single one of his works. I think my favorite line from a Marvel comic in its entire publication history is in Born Again, where Daredevil's house was blown up and he's like, everything's gone wrong and Kingpin's destroying his life, but he doesn't know it yet. And he's like, picks up the burning Daredevil suit and he's like, you did it. You broke everything about me. You committed the perfect crime. You did everything, but you shouldn't have signed it. And, like, it's just that fucking level of a pause and then the perfect line to follow that pause is he's unmatched with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I can't help but admire him for some of the stuff like that. So yeah, like the Nancy story, again, I'll give compliment sandwiches out here all day, I guess, where I'm gonna sneak some stuff in the middle here. Like the story with Willis and Jessica Alba and stuff, you know, like it starts relatively strong, and I like the idea, you know, old man dies, young girl lives, fair trade. Oh, that's great. That's great. And then you get to the end where we restart this story, and like they bring him back to life. And oh wait, hold on. I skipped probably the best line. I take his weapon away. Both of them. Rips off his dick. Just Jesus.
That's probably my favorite line.
Right. But, like, I wake up in a hospital, and just all this stuff, and then he's in prison, and you get that beautiful shot of, like, him in the cell, and the bars go on forever. Like, that's gorgeous. And then they let him out, and you get through the whole thing. And then it's like, oh, yeah, the little girl he saved is now in love with him, and he knows it should be wrong, but at the same time, it feels so right. You know, I'm like, it's creepy and it's weird. It's creepy and it's weird. There's really no getting around that side of things. Little Nancy stripping on stage. Oh, ew. But it's supposed to be creepy and weird, and she loves him back, and I don't know about all this. This is it's a little odd. And then he does the manly, toxic, manly, noble thing of killing himself so that he can't be tempted anymore, and also she can live safely. And I'm like, whatever with this. It's ridiculous. There's like as cool and as poignant as that ending is with Bruce Willis's character committing suicide. There's something about that undeniably really works. But like it's one of those things where the execution there is great, but the more I think about it, the more that is just like wrong with that scene on a number of levels, and it just feels weird. It's like he's allowed to be attracted to her as long as he's not willing to act on that attraction. He's going to do the toxic male self-sacrifice move. I'm like, yeah, that's probably not a good, but damn if you don't feel it in the moment though, you know?
See, I wasn't picking up so much on he did it to keep himself away from her. I took it that he did this to her from a priest and a politician. Because like he even says in a narration, like, they will not stop coming after her unless I'm dead. So I thought that was his main motivation for killing himself.
I think that's there, but I think there's also heavily implication that he's developing feelings for her that are more than just about protecting her. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't want to allow himself to act on that because then he's too much like the villain, you know? And that's, again, there's... It's weird, right? Because on paper, that motivation doesn't suck. In execution, it's weird, it's uncomfortable, and I don't know, I just don't know how to feel about it, and so maybe suicide is the best solution in that case. I don't know.
Just get it over with.
Just, fuck these emotions. There's some odd thoughts. I don't really want to get into my controversial opinions on age differences in romantic relationships. I'd rather not today, if that's good with you guys. Let's go on to the next story, unless anyone else has something to say about the little yellow bastard.
I think that's a good call. The only thing I will say is the one thing in this film that I feel like doesn't particularly translate from the comic that well is the look of the yellow bastard. I think he's a bit too jarring, specifically in the prosthetics, and I know how ridiculous the rest of this world is, and it's not adhering to the laws of reality, but it does take you a while to get used to him, and he stands out in a way that doesn't, it feels a lot more, I guess jarring is the intent. He's meant to be like the stink in the whole place, but I don't know, it's the one choice in this that I feel like maybe they shouldn't have gone straight as much as they did.
Okay, I think that's fair. Like maybe if they could have just found an actor that looked more like that without the prosthetics and stuff.
Yeah, that's probably what I'd be prefer. Just because, like, again, it's just like it just takes you out the moment when he's just like, oh yeah, I had special things to grow my dick back, but this is what it caused. I'm just like, okay. I was in this gritty noir drama with kind of like some like heightened elements just for the fact of like it's these big emotions in play. Like he can take 50 bullets, but just one in the right place will do him in. Like I'm fine with that. The moment you start bringing in like genetic mutation, I'm just like, okay, come on.
It does jump a certain shark. I could see that. All right, what's the next story? I can't remember what follows the.
Is it Clive Owen or is it Marv?
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, Marv is probably the most just unbelievable, powerhouse of this movie, where he just takes anything. Like literally, they shoot him in the head and he wakes back up. And then they fucking execute him, and he's like, "Is that all you got?"
Thank God all day.
Right? Oh, it's so ridiculous, and you just kind of like laugh at it, and there is that side of it, but at the same time there is that like, oh, it's so cool. He's so fucking badass, and it's like, are you serious with this shit? There's that side of it, like you think about it for 10 seconds, like this is actually pretty fucking dumb. I don't know why it works on me as well as it does.
Yeah. And on the one hand, I agree with you, Alfie, about like the yellow bastard. Just it's an odd element in an otherwise like you've got this one tone of this series and this story, and then suddenly you've got like we used weird mad science magic to grow him back, and it turned him into a little goblin. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's odd. And then you've also got Marv, who is basically like Captain America level superpowers without the weird origin story. Like, you know, you could honestly like do yourself some damage if you did a drinking game every time he takes some damage that would kill a normal human being. And like if you put the yellow bastard in this story, it'd be just right at, you know, everything would fit perfectly. But it's just that this is like, I guess overall, like if you take these two elements together, the world of Sin City is not meant to be a realistic world, but it's still odd that we're kind of left thinking that it is kind of, you know, Raymond Chandler times 10, but then you watch it and it's like, oh no, it's not. It's Raymond Chandler plus Jack Kirby times 20 or whatever. Mm-hmm. Plus, you know, Frank Miller's problematic personal views.
Yeah, that's the thing about it, is like it's just got some stuff in it where I'm like, man, this is weird, but at the same time it's really cool. Like it's got like things where like if it were anyone else it'd be like, oh, that's probably just them trying to say that the character thinks that. But I really do, because it's Frank Miller, I'm like, does he think that shit? Like Marv's parole officer being a lesbian, he's like, she just hasn't found the right guy yet, or whatever he says about her. I'm like, that's some shit. Okay, whatever. It has literally nothing to do with anything. It's just snuck in there. And it's like that like typical shitty take on lesbians. And I'm like, is he just doing that for the character to let us know that this guy's still kind of a dick? Or is he just throwing in his, by the way, lesbians aren't really lesbians, they just haven't had a good dickin' yet, worldview? I don't really know. I've not heard Frank Miller talk about his views on, you know, the LGBTQ community. But that's a weird thing to just throw in there, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's something where I think out of everyone, Marv probably is the character closest to like his own views on the world. He's definitely the one who feels more like he's given the role more of like, we've got 3 different protagonists, but he definitely feels, I could be more wrong, but he feels the most Miller protagonist that could like continue its own series with like, he's got all the efficiency of a Miller character. He's an unrelenting force of just pure will. And that works for me. I don't mind the fact that he can like take seemingly endless punishment. I think that works in the story for what it's trying to be, because like noir doesn't necessarily have to be real. It's like a heightened John Wick almost, is where this guy is just unstoppable, but it's purely because of his motivation. And when his motivation wanes, that's his power going. Like I like that as a thematic notion, and I think that works for me personally to justify like how efficient he is at doing all these crazy things and justify the action. But yeah, Marvin, this feels the most Miller view, and I think that like again, like he calls her a dyke, and he's like, with that body she could have any man she wants. Like those feel like very Miller. Like he's written similar kind of things in like the All-Star Batman and Robin. Like,
what are you, dense kid? Are you retarded or something? I'm the goddamn Batman.
Or just like the if you look at like the script for that, he told Jim Lee he was just like zoom in on Vicky Vale's ass, make us want her, you know it, they want it. Yeah, he writes that kind of shit. So I can totally 100% be like, oh no, this is just Miller saying what he thinks. I was like, oh yeah, this is the world. Darkness, that kind of thing is, yeah. But in general, I think for me, this is the strongest of all the other stories. I think this is the one I got the most enjoyment out of, and I think this one's got the thing that the payoff, the middle. It doesn't have a moment like the Nancy story where you're just kind of brought out by the little bastard, or just he calls the little girl he saved and now she's grown up the love of his life. That's kind of fucked. The ideas here are more, this is a guy who's probably an asshole, who would probably just be like a Batman mook, but he got one act of kindness that made him want to protect something in a world he had no purpose for before. That's powerful shit. And I think that's the kind of thing Miller excels at, is making you feel that for this person and making you like respect and like want to see succeed this guy, because he's doing it for a very simple, understandable goal of just basic emotional happiness that he's trying to chase and trying to like do right by this person for what he had. And I feel that works well. I feel Miller's a very good person at understanding base human emotions of meet woman, share moment of lovemaking, go back, woman dead, I want revenge. Those are kind of primal things that speak to humanity on like a whole, of just like your lover and then meeting her and then losing her all in the space of one night. It's powerful, heightened things that suits the material for the world it's in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that side of the story does really work, but at the same time, it is like the most. I mean, she's fucking fridged, right? There's really no. It is entirely the fridge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like so that's the undercut side of it, and so I think this might be a good opportunity to transition into the next story, which is like, okay, so Frank Miller fridges a female character, and the only real contribution any woman makes to that story is sexual. Like, Goldie, her contribution to the story is she has sex with Marv. And her sister's contribution to the story is she looks like her sister, but doesn't have sex with Marv. And, like, that's pretty much it. For what the women contribute in that story, you know, oh, Dame, sometimes they just need to let it all out, then they're fine. You know, his parole officer screams really loudly, right? But then you get to the next story, and so Frank Miller's apparently able to tell a story where he gives us fridged female characters. What can he do with characters who are... what can he do when he's trying to write a strong female character? Well, they have to be prostitutes, and also ninjas, and they have to throw shurikens that are shaped like swastikas. Because... why? It's weird, right? Like, it's no wonder so many comic fans are kind of right-wing. When
100%.
When you realize, like, this is the stuff that a lot of them are sourcing their views on, or at least informing their worldviews on. It's like, yeah, so women can be important characters in stories if they die after having sex, or if they use sex as a weapon, along with other stabby weapons. What? This character is just being written like any generic superhero, but it's a girl. Why should I care? Well, maybe, just maybe, some women don't want to see themselves solely as sex objects. And so that's what you're kind of left with, is like this head scratchy shit. I'm like, really? I don't know. What do you guys think about the prostitute warrior women? The warrior women from Planet Prostitute.
Frank Miller I don't think I'm being too hot takey when I say this. He's always kind of had a problematic take on women. Like he wrote and co-wrote and co-plotted with Chris Claremont a 4-issue Wolverine miniseries back in the 80s that had 2 female characters in it, both of whom were like on opposite extremes. Like you had one who was just like seen and not heard, and just very like, you know, this is what women should be like, you know, according to the, you know, that type of guy, the toxic masculine guy. And then you had the other one who was, I guess, Frank Miller, but was still very problematic in its own way. And you can see shades of Sin City in Frank Miller's earlier works like that, like the Wolverine miniseries. You can see a little bit of it there. It's not nearly as cartoonish as it is here, but you can start to see the beginnings of it. And I wish I could say I was surprised to see an army of prostitutes with samurai swords and Nazi shurikens, but I wasn't.
And it's one of those things where 100%, like, Frank Miller's most famous, maybe arguable, but I don't think it is, most famous female character is Elektra. And this is just, Elektra was introduced purely as she is a supervillain who is a woman who's very scantily clad and uses her sex as a weapon. She will fight Daredevil with pointy objects, and her main weapon against him is has sex appeal to him to lure him to the darkness. But like, if Daredevil gives in and gets with Elektra, he will lose his innocence of like being a true hero kind of figure. She's like Catwoman to the nth degree. Is like, you cannot have sex with her because she's a crazy ninja, and for some reason that will make Matt Murdock a crazy ninja too. That's.
I mean, she's the apple, right? She's temptation.
Yeah, but like temptation with 2 size. But then again, Elektra. Other most famous moment is when Bullseye, in a very, like, he's described it in himself in his Daredevil interview. He's like, "Oh, this was a rape murder." Is where Bullseye uses his size to stab Elektra in the gut, and it's drawn and written very sexual metaphor thing. Again, all of that, Elektra as a whole is just all you need to understand Frank Miller's like idea of women in his most like. This is his highest value of them. He's like, he will praise Elektra till the cows come home. But if that's your highest, like, oh, this is the greatest purpose in a story of the character, I'm like, maybe we don't want you to write Wonder Woman.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, and so it's not that. The thing is, I liked this more before I really knew much more about Frank Miller, and I began to see the patterns emerge. Like, I do feel that, you know, the prostitute warrior women, it's a cool take, it's a cool idea, it's fun, it's got its moments. And if this were the only time he ever did anything like that, it would be fine. But it's the fact that it's like, this is just his mode. This is all he knows how to do, and that's a little weird. And so that's the part that makes it like, I do like it, I can't lie, I enjoy it when I watch it, it's kind of cool. You know, she fucking cuts the dude up and throws him in the trunk, and then they like, you know, fucking put the mobsters in an alleyway and they just shoot guns down on him. It's kind of cool. But at the same time, it's like, if those are the only things you know how to do with female characters, I begin to get worried. And I begin to think that that's the point at which I'm like, okay, there's where I begin to see it as a reflection on the writer or the artist, as opposed to just like one little thing, you know? It's when it becomes a trend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think I would say like, oh, this guy is problematic if it was just one scene, but like, it's several things in this, and not only this, but in Frank Miller's entire body of work. Like, if it was just Sin City as like the odd man out, and then everything else Frank Miller did was like, you know, pretty positive and like societally, you know, more accepted, then that'd be one thing. But like, a lot of what Frank Miller has done has a lot of these same earmarks of like, this is kind of disturbing, and you want to kind of just step away from it.
Yeah, that's kind of the reaction I have. Like here, it's that problem of conceptually it's pretty fucked, but execution wise, you do have to admire it on some level. Like just in the moment when you're watching it, if you're not thinking about the wider implications, if you're not thinking about the trend, or if you're in my boat and you didn't know about the trend when you first watched it, I think it watches fine, and it's fine in that way. It becomes a problem later on, is the thing, you know? It becomes a problem when you get the wider context, and that's when you start to judge it. But like the execution in the film itself is flawless, and that's something that I can really appreciate, because like Robert Rodriguez is a guy who does actually know how to do women or do female characters outside of just sex objects. You know, sometimes it works better than others, but like, you know, I like Predators. I like his female characters in Predators, and that's like a very masculine franchise, and the female character he puts in Predators is, you know, a pretty cool character that can hang with the boys, but she doesn't feel like this might as well have just been a man. She feels like she's very much in that movie there for a role to be a female character, but she's still written strongly and she's not a sex object. All those things tick off really well. It's not a perfect movie or anything, but it shows me that Robert Rodriguez knows how to do other things, and that's very important.
And I think that's basically Frank Miller. Is his entire rap is fueled by those trends, where I feel like if people would speak very different of Frank Miller, I think, like just in general, he'd be seen differently by history if he had just done his Daredevil stuff, Born Again, Dark Knight Returns, Year One, and Sin City. If that was it, and he just like disappeared from comics for a while, or started doing like more indie stuff, or just made the effort to differentiate his work a little bit more, I think people would have a much higher view of him as a writer, which I think sometimes he definitely deserves. He is a very damn good writer with narration, and he's got some great ideas, and he's wrote some works which have changed how the comic book industry is told, like permanently. Like Dark Knight Returns just changed things forever. Even if you don't like that story, it's just impacted things with such an extent that nothing ever will again. It just came out at the perfect time in history. You can't take that away from him. But heaven help him, he's trying to take that away from himself.
Yeah. All right, so what else can we talk about with the warrior prostitutes?
I thought this was the...
Stephen Wright is probably my favorite performance in the entire fucking film. Can I just say that? What are you gonna do? Call AAA. The hookers didn't give you enough gas. Stephen Wright's just the best. I love that man's... That man has such great delivery of just everything he says. They say the universe is expanding. That should cut down on the traffic.
This is actually him reprising his role from So I Married an Ex-Murderer. I'm just kidding. I knew you guys...
To me now.
Yeah. I think, is it weird for me to say that Clive Owen's character is maybe my favorite one in the movie? Like, I'll go. It's weird to say anyone in this movie is your favorite character in the movie, because they're all kind of problematic. But up until a point, I thought, oh, he's the least problematic. But then I was like, oh wait, no, never mind. He is problematic. So I don't know. I still kind of like him. I think Clive Owen is doing a good performance. But for part of the movie anyway, I was like, hey, I like this guy. He's not a horrible human being. And I was like, oh, he kind of is.
Wait, what does Clive Owen do? Like, that makes him bad? I'm racking my brain trying to remember.
Oh, he's got the girlfriend played by Brittany Murphy, and then you find out he's also sleeping with Rosario Dawson, or at least was at one time. And then during the course of this adventure, he and her start making out. And so I'm not sure if he's sleeping with her on the side while he's also in a committed relationship with Brittany Murphy, or if this is like a former relationship that he had, and then he's just kind of kissing her a little bit right now.
I think it's definitely meant to be a former relationship, and then it's like the actions of the story have rekindled it, and he's not really in love with Brittany Murphy's character. That's my take on it. You know, to his credit, again, I'll compliment Sandwich Frank Miller all day. To his credit, I feel Frank Miller handles romantic affairs really well. Just as a writer, as a thing he does, I think handling the affair as an understandable thing that people kind of feel ashamed about, but they kind of just get caught up in it. Mm-hmm. I think he does that really well, because that's in year one as well with Gordon. Yeah. And it works really well in that book. We've got this more like darker Gotham and our heroes and everything. And that book follows Gordon, and he's getting wrapped up in the in this affair with Sarah Essen, and it's as someone who is married, it is a bad thing to cheat on your spouse. As someone who is in a relationship, it's a bad thing to cheat on that person. But at the same time, I feel like he handles that kind of story in a reasonably nuanced way and makes it interesting. Because I don't think that cheating is... I think cheating on someone is probably like the least bad thing anyone does in this movie, you know? But it is certainly bad, but I don't think it's like... I think it's one of those things that's much more relatable and understandable, because I feel everyone feels temptation, or everyone feels like they get caught up in a moment with someone and feel that kind of passion kindle. So I think that I'll give Frank Miller some credit. I think he handles that kind of thing reasonably well, and he sells it, if nothing else. Is it so problematic that it's like... I don't know. Alfie, you've read more of his stuff. Has he done the opposite? Has he done a story where a woman cheats on a man?
I think it's implied a bit that Elektra is like not entirely 100% with Matt. She's kind of just having fun with him while she's also having fun with whoever she's more interested in at that time. And he
I meant more as like and portrays it in the same way where it's understandable.
Oh no, he doesn't treat it as in the same way like Gordon is, like very respectfully, like this is a human emotion, he's in a right place, wrong time kind of thing, as everything's going wrong, but also he doesn't want to fight it because he does have feelings. Like that's all handled well. I don't think he's ever done that kind of care to a female relationship to a guy where it's never the temptation. It's always women are either victims of sex or they're using sex as a weapon. It's never they use sex as like the men are treated, where it's more complicated than those two things.
Yeah, I figured about as much. So like as much as I think he does it well, it does still have that kind of misogynistic thing where, oh, it's okay when a man does it, but if a woman does it, then it means her moral character is low and she's just do it with anyone kind of thing. It's like it's got that sexist undertone. So like I'll give him a little bit of credit. I think he handles it well with men. I think he can write it well, but it has to be with men, and I don't think he'd extend the same kind of moral generosity for ambiguously immoral things to a female character, and that's the problem, you know? I'll defend Miller a little bit, but I will concede that one easily.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. For me, though, this part of the story was probably the weakest. Clive Owen's character was the least interesting of the three to me, where he's the only one who I feel like lacks really a motivation to be doing this. Like he's just kind of, he's like, they go into the thing where he's like, oh, I've got the feeling that this guy's dangerous, so I better follow him, and he just kind of spirals from there. But at the same time, I feel like that's a lot weaker of an impetus for action compared to how emotionally like resonant. The little girl is in danger, of cop has to save her, and like one-time lover is murdered, and there's a mystery around it, kind of thing. It's just it falls. It's not necessarily bad, but it just falls in immediately weaker compared to the other two, and immediately makes me feel like, oh, okay, this guy's not as. He's not as compelling to watch. If anything, I'm just more interested in Rosario Dawson's character and wish she was the main character of this story, because he's just kind of nothing to me. He's just kind of there. I think the problem with this is, Ruben, you said he's the least problematic of them, and I think that's right. But to me, in a Frank Miller story, I think he just writes problematic people more interestingly. Like, he knows how to write those people because he's probably got more of that in himself. Like, I feel like he can make them more interesting characters as a result of that. That's why he's such a good fit for Daredevil, because again, Matt Murdock's kind of a bastard. Like, this is more of his field of expertise, whereas I felt like Clive Owen's character is just kind of like the good guy who's in a bit of a morally tangled relationship with his feelings for someone. It's just kind of there to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that's the thing, is the most problematic aspect of him is something that is understandable if not justifiable, you know? And that does just make him less compelling on the screen, as it were. Okay, so is that the end of it? Because we already talked about the Nancy stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is that the last one before the Nancy, or am I forgetting one?
No, that's just those three, and then if you're going to count the little epilogue at the end where the snitch gets shot.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just the same. That's just part of the story as well anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I can't believe we got through the whole thing and everyone forgot to mention Elijah Wood eating people.
I mean...
With his forest karate.
Oh, he looks so fucking goofy doing that, and I love it. Like, his little, like, bobs and weaves. He just... Some actors can pull off that kind of action and make it look cool, but Elijah Wood just doesn't suit being physically competent as a fighter. It's just his face doesn't match those movements. I don't want to sound mean, but it's just like every time I see him like with the Wolverine claws like slashing around, it just makes me giggle.
I want to see somebody do an edit where, like, while Marv is, fighting him, and it is Marv, right? Not Bruce Willis. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Marv.
In the forest, that you see Wilford in the background, like running around.
Oh wow, Wilford reference. God, what happened to Elisha Wood? That he did fucking he did 4 seasons of Wilford, didn't he?
Yeah, 4 or 5, I think.
Jesus, that was so weird. Alrighty, well, I guess we should go ahead and go on to ratings. Ruben, I guess I'm most curious about you. What do you want to rate this film?
Oh boy, that's tough because, again, it comes back to what I was saying at the very beginning. Artistically, this movie is a vision to watch. It is beautiful, and it really holds up. I'm one of the I don't really give visual effects. I can be very picky when it comes to visual effects, but this movie is over 10 years old and it still looks really good. I'm gonna give it a 2.5. Not decapitated. What's the word when someone loses their legs, like Elijah Wood did? You know what I mean?
Amputated?
Amputated, yeah. 2.5 out of 5 amputated Elijah Woods is,
So,
because...
can I just give you, the top half of the body and the bottom half of the body and maybe, I don't know, an extra leg or something?
Yeah. But yeah, it's, visually, it looks really good, but the story and the characters, we pretty much covered the whole podcast talking about how, it's a little gross at times, but, it's still, it's like a train wreck. You cannot look away, but at the same time, it's still a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm gonna go a little higher than you, Ruben. Not much, but I'm gonna give it a 3.5 out of 5. My mitts, because I fucking love that line. Again, I think it's I think when you look at it in the context of what Frank Miller is all about, and you look at it in a wider context, it's definitely got a lot of stuff that is undeniably like kind of problematic, but if you just take it on its own, which you probably shouldn't, but if you do, there is this undeniable undercurrent of things that just work for it, and it's kind of undeniable. So even if you disagree with the premise, even if you disagree with the tone, it's kind of hard to just deny the execution, is the take that I have on it. So I'm going to give it, 3.5 out of 5, my mitts.
For me, again, I'm probably going to go even higher than you, Ian, just because with my media, I can acknowledge the problematic aspects of things and I can derail from that, and I think that's perfectly right to do so, and it's necessary to do so when you enjoy media. But I think at the same time, I think it's completely fine to enjoy media that has their elements in it, as long as you recognize that as problematic and wrong elements to not be continued. And just personally, that's how I would go with a lot of Frank Miller stuff. And this in particular, I think, is definitely one of his stronger suits. And with how it's shot and just the uses of the acting and the overacting, I love as well. And just this type of feel, doing exactly what it set out to do in the best way possible. Like, this is entirely his intent. Nothing else was, you can tell nothing was shelved. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 helpful friend wolves, who is the best character in this entire thing because he's helpful and he eats Elijah Wood. Yeah,
what a good doggo. Even Frank Miller knows how to write a good doggo. Alrighty. Alfie, I believe it's your pick, and it should be a topic, but we had a off recording discussion and decided to fuck the rules because we do what we want on Geeky Gentlemen. Alfie, what are we doing next week?
We're going to be doing a game that a lot of people have heard of, a lot of people respect, a lot of people hate, but it's a game that someone's got to do. For the first time, I think, a kind of experiment, Sonic R.
Yeah, it'll be a good time. You'll be able to feel the sunshine. It'll brighten up your day.
We just don't want to go away.
I know. Sometimes you do feel like you've just got to run away, but sometimes you just feel the sunshine. All right, everyone. See you next week for that. Until then, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
And I'm a geek for fun.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.